You woke up this morning, made coffee, maybe checked your phone. Completely normal morning. And somewhere between waking up and right now, someone quietly took money from you. Not from your wallet, not from your account. You will never see a charge. You will never get a receipt. But it happened. It happens every single day. And the person doing it is not a thief. In fact, you voted for them. This is the story of inflation. Not the textbook version, not the PowerPoint version your economics teacher showed you in 2009, the real version, the one that explains why your rent went up, why your groceries feel wrong, why you are working harder than your parents did and somehow feeling poorer. Let us start with a question that sounds simple but is not. What actually is money? Most people would say money is the thing in their wallet. Fair. But here's a better answer. Money is a claim. When you hold a $100 bill or £100 or whatever currency sits in your account right now, you are holding a promise from your government that this piece of paper or this number on a screen can be exchanged for a certain amount of real things in the real world. Food, fuel, time, labor, real things. The problem is that promise can be broken, slowly, quietly, over time. And here's where it gets interesting. Imagine a town, small town, one bakery, one baker. A loaf of bread costs $1. The town has exactly $1,000 in circulation. 10 people, each one holds $100. Life is stable. The bread costs what it costs. Now the mayor decides the town needs a new bridge, but the town has no savings, so instead of raising taxes, which would be unpopular, the mayor does something clever. He prints 500 new dollars, hands them out. People feel richer. They go buy bread. But there's only one baker, and he can only bake so much bread. Suddenly, 10 people with more money are chasing the same loaves. The baker, not an idiot, raises his prices. The bread that cost $1 now costs $1.50. Your $100 buys less bread than it did yesterday. Nothing was stolen from you. No one broke the law, but you are poorer. The purchasing power of your money just quietly evaporated. That is inflation. And that bridge, it was essentially paid for by silently taxing every single person in town without ever calling it a tax. Now scale that to an entire economy, trillions of dollars, hundreds of millions of people, and decades of time. Here's the uncomfortable math. Since 1971, when the United States formally decoupled its currency from gold, the dollar has lost roughly 87% of its purchasing power. That means something that cost $1 in 1971 costs around $8 today, not because the thing got more valuable, because the dollar got weaker. Think about that. If your grandparents had stuffed $1,000 under their mattress in 1971, that same $1,000 would buy you roughly what $130 bought back then. The mattress did not steal from them. Inflation did. And yet, every year, governments and central banks around the world set an official inflation target. In the United States, it's 2%. In the UK, 2%. The European Central Bank, 2%. 2% sounds harmless. It sounds like almost nothing, a rounding error. But here's what 2% actually means over time. At 2% annual inflation, prices double roughly 35 years. So the house your parents bought, the salary your parents earned, the life your parents built has a price tag that is now double what it was when they started. The goalposts moved while you were busy running. And here's the quiet irony. The people who hold assets, who own real estate, stocks, businesses, commodities, those people tend to be protected. Their wealth is anchored to real things. When money loses value, their real things often keep pace or rise. The people who hold cash, who keep their savings in a checking account earning 0.5%, who depend on a fixed salary, they absorb the loss. They are the ones the invisible tax falls on hardest. Now let's talk about how this actually works, because it's not random. When a central bank, say the Federal Reserve, wants to stimulate the economy, it does something called quantitative easing. That's a complicated phrase for a simple action. It creates money, electronically, and uses that money to buy assets, usually government bonds, from banks. The banks now have more cash, they lend more, businesses borrow more, people spend more, the economy heats up, and as it heats up, prices start to rise. Between 2020 and 2022, the Federal Reserve increased its balance sheet by roughly $4 trillion in under 2 years. $4 trillion. In context, that's more money created in 24 months than had been created in the previous 100 years of the Fed's existence. Was it necessary? Economists argue about that constantly. A pandemic had just shut down the global economy. Millions of people needed support. The logic made sense in the moment. But physics doesn't care about logic. You put that much new money into a system that produces roughly the same amount of real goods, and prices will rise. Not might rise, will rise. By mid-2022, U.S. inflation had hit 9.1%, the highest in 40 years. Grocery bills, rent, energy, childcare, everything moved at once, and for anyone living paycheck to paycheck, there was nowhere to hide. Here's the part that tends to make people uncomfortable. Governments have a complicated relationship with inflation. On one hand, they publicly hate it. Politicians go on television and promise to fight it. They blame supply chains, foreign adversaries, corporations, fuel prices. They'll blame almost anything except the one mechanism they directly control. On the other hand, inflation is actually quite useful if you're the one who owes a lot of money. The United States national debt currently sits north of $34 trillion. That's a number so large it loses meaning. But here's what inflation does to debt. It erodes it. A debt of $1 trillion is easier to repay in 20 years if inflation has been steadily running, because the dollars you repay are worth less than the dollars you borrowed. Governments, in a quiet, structural, completely legal sense, benefit from moderate inflation. It lightens the real burden of their debt over time. Now, they would never say that out loud, but the math doesn't need anyone to say it out loud. So what do you do about it? Some people say buy gold. Some people say buy property. Some people say buy Bitcoin. Some people say buy index funds. Every economic era produces its preferred hedge, and every generation discovers that the hedge works until it doesn't, or until everyone else discovers it too. The honest answer is that most ordinary people have limited tools. They can try to invest. They can try to negotiate higher wages. They can try to understand what is actually happening and make slightly better decisions than the person who doesn't. But the system is designed to make this easy. The system, in fact, is designed to be opaque. If everyone clearly understood that holding cash was a guaranteed slow loss, the social and political consequences would be significant. So, instead, the mechanism hums quietly in the background. A 2% target, a central bank meeting, a press release with careful language, and your grocery bill, when you're not really paying attention, goes up again. Zoom out for a moment. Every complex society in history has had to answer the same basic question. How do you fund collective needs without tearing the society apart? War, infrastructure, healthcare, crisis response, these things are enormously expensive. Direct taxation has limits, political and practical. Debt has limits too. And so, across centuries, governments discovered inflation, not as a policy they advertise, as a tool they keep in the back of the drawer. The Roman Empire debased its silver coins by mixing in cheaper metals. Medieval kings clipped the edges off coins and pocketed the metal. 20th century governments printed paper. 21st century governments do it electronically, at speeds that would make a medieval king faint. The mechanism changes, the logic stays exactly the same. Here's where this ends, or rather where it doesn't end. Inflation is not a conspiracy, it's not a secret, it's a documented, observable, mathematical feature of every modern economy. The people running it are not villains. They're navigating genuinely hard problems with imperfect tools under enormous pressure. But the fact that it's not a conspiracy doesn't mean you're not being taxed. You are, every single year, at whatever rate the invisible hand decides to set. The question is not whether this bothers you. The question is whether you are going to remain the person in the town who holds cash while the baker raises prices, or whether you are going to understand what is actually happening well enough to make a different choice. And maybe the deeper question, the one that doesn't have a comfortable answer, is this. If the people running the system have every structural incentive to keep it running exactly as it is, and if most people are too busy surviving to notice, then who exactly is this system designed to serve? You can probably answer that, but you might not like the answer. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more interesting finance videos.